الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين وصحبه الصالحين. I greet you all with Islamic greetings and peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. I'd like to thank the Muslim of Islamic Society for inviting me to discuss an interesting title. I think the first time we've ever discussed this title. When I first received it, I thought, what particular content, what to say about Je suis Musulman or Je suis Muslim, what to say about that word, because it has so much content, so much meaning. It's an entire worldview, it's an entire way of life, it's an entire perspective. So how could I do justice to just explaining that I'm a Muslim and what that significance is? I suppose when you think about religions, and you think about that there are so many religions in the world, and you think maybe in this modern world people perceive religion as a kind of fashion or linked to just culture. So you follow a religion because it's the belief of the area you come from, or it's the particular culture you adopt, or it's the particular fashion of society that you emerged from, whichever society you came from, or it's just because your parents told you. Just like your style of clothing, your style of food. And of course, if religion is no more than that, then what truth is behind religion? What truth is behind belief? If it's just fashion, I mean, fashion is arbitrary. It always changes. Culture can be arbitrary. It doesn't mean that it relates to any particular universal truth. And the area that religion deals with is the truth of human existence. It's the purpose of life. It's the meaning behind the cosmos. I mean, surely it couldn't be a different truth depending on which culture you come from. Surely could only be one truth because there's only one universe. So, what is Islam and what does it mean to be a Muslim? I think one of the most fascinating things I encountered when I studied Islam was that Islam doesn't claim to be a brand new religion. It doesn't claim to be an extrapolation of Arabic culture. Yeah, sure, its scriptures are in Arabic and it emerged from an area that was in the Arabian Peninsula, but the truth behind Islam is actually claimed to be universal. So what does Islam mean, first of all? Well, many people discuss that Islam has many root origins. One particular origin is salam, means peace. Another one is istislam, which means submission, to submit to one's purpose, to one's creator, to the natural law behind mankind's creation. And of course, being a Muslim is the description of a person who has submitted to their purpose in life, to the law behind their creation, to the creator. And that pretty much encapsulates really what Islam is and how Muslims approach their belief. Because Islam believes that there is a creator behind everything in the universe. And this creator made everything and every civilization. The ancient Egyptians, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the civilizations of the Indus Valley, what you might call the Chinese civilization, even Western civilization. Everyone was made by the same creator. And we believe, and what the fascinating thing Islam claims, is that all peoples have received revelation throughout human history. Now, we don't know exactly how long human history has gone on for. Some people find the oldest fossil records of humans maybe 1 million years ago. And Islam believes and posits that every nation has received at some point a revelation from the creator of the universe. And the fascinating thing is that we see a lot of commonality behind different religions. a lot of commonality behind different belief systems. Like the belief in an afterlife. I mean, the Chinese civilization had a belief in the afterlife which incorporated something approximate to heaven and hell. They weren't Christian. Obviously, we know of 2,000 years ago, the belief of heaven and hell, and even before that, the Jewish religion, or the religion of the people of Judea, also believed in an afterlife and accountability of heaven and hell. We also know that the pagan Greeks believed also in a type of heaven and hell as well. We also notice that every civilization believed in a head or central god or main central spirit. And I explain. So at the time of the Prophet Muhammad in the Arabian Peninsula, this is 1400 years ago, the religion of the pagan Arabs believed in a central god figure, the god of Abraham. The Arabs understood themselves to be descendants of one of Abraham's sons, Ishmael. But they didn't just believe in this central god figure. According to tradition and legend, over time there were many holy men or saints, or even just Arab travelers going to other parts of the Middle East and borrowing statues and idols from other areas. And to this idea of a monotheism was added these other idols or representations of dead saints, which were then viewed as intercessors between man and God, so that if you wanted to have healthy children, you would pray to a very specific deity. You'd make intercession to that deity between you and God, and that deity would be specialized in fertility, for example. Or if you wanted wealth, you would pray to a particular deity which would be specialized in wealth. But the fascinating thing is that the Arabs understood that the God of Abraham there was only one God. And in some cases, in the discussions between them and the Prophet Muhammad, they would admit that there is only one God, but these other deities were really intercessors or came after. And in many traditions, including the Hindu polytheism and Greek polytheism, all these other gods actually are admitted to have come later or were created at some point. But there's always a head god. There's always a first god or a high god, and then all these other sub-gods that came afterwards, which I found fascinating because Islam posited that the original religion of mankind is monotheism, or rather just theism, the belief in God. But over time, humans made gods in their own image because maybe God was just too aloof to some superficial understandings, and so they wanted to be able to see something to worship, something they could relate to, which looked like them or looked like an animal spirit or animal of some kind of creature that they are used to, or a fantasy creature, which is a combination of different things, such as like a horn from a rhino and a horse you can make into a unicorn, for example. So it's a combination of different things. However, Islam came to posit that God being omniscient and all-powerful, why would God need to have intercessors to hear your prayers or to hear and know about you? I mean, God is not like a busy prime minister or president that needs to have ministers to deal with the people because God doesn't have enough time or God's too limited in ability. And that's really one of the most amazing things I encountered by Islam, was this pure understanding of monotheism, or Tawheed in Arabic, which posited, on the face of it, actually very common sense arguments, that humans alter religion to their own desires over history, and that all religions ultimately started the same, and they all had the same message. So if anyone is coming here today to hear that the truth of the cosmos was only revealed to mankind just 1400 years ago, you'll be disappointed, because we believe that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, from his own teachings and from the Quran, posited a reiteration. In fact, the Quran is described as the dhikr a reminder. It's just here to remind mankind of this old truth that came to many other prophets beforehand and was delivered to many other civilizations. Now, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a merchant by profession, and he lived in the Arabian Peninsula. At the time, the Arabs had two different lifestyles, you could say. One was some would live in the cities. There'd be the sedentary Arabs, and there was only a few cities in the Arabian Peninsula that were fully developed. The other Arabs would be nomads, and they would take their flocks and their herds to pasture in different places, and they'd be on the move. The culture of the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was one where obviously the people were very superstitious. They engaged in tribal politics, even in the towns. Although the towns had councils of nobles, each of these nobles would represent their own tribes, and there could be infighting and feuding, and in some cases, inter-tribal war that would last, in one particular case, a century, which started over a slight to someone's camel, which is actually a true report. We also know that the Arabs didn't have, they weren't developed like the Romans, they weren't developed like the Persian Empire, certainly not. They didn't have a concept of rights. Rather, if you offended one individual or one man, or you hurt a man, or you even killed a man, their tribe would get revenge on their behalf against the tribe that committed that, or the person from the tribe that committed that murder or offense. Of course, women had even less rights. Unless you, as a woman, had a very strong and powerful brother or father, you weren't really protected by any rights, and so you could be dictated to by your husband, mistreated, and there would be no one coming to your aid. In fact, women were viewed to be inferior to men, and it was viewed as a great shame that the firstborn of any family would be a woman. It was always esteemed that the firstborn of every family should be a male child. And not all the Arabs practiced it, but there were times when certainly families which were quite noble and didn't want to lose face in public, if their firstborn child was a female, they would kill that child by burying them alive to avoid the perceived shame in that society. The other thing that was very interesting about the Arabs of Arabia was they were very skilled in poetry. I suppose you could imagine it, if I'm going to kind of coin a modern day analogy, to certain parts of the United States, for example, which are prone to, let's say, gangs being those areas, and rap emerging from gangland areas. For the Arabs, it was poetry. They would preserve their knowledge in poetry, their history in poetry, the records of the battles of their tribe in poetry. Their knowledge of medicine would be recorded in poetry. Very similar actually to the Greek civilization, of which poetry was also used to record history and their religion. And also, Arabic is a very expressive language in of itself. In fact, some linguists have said that the three most expressive languages in terms of the richness of the language, the very precision, the variety of the descriptive words, are Chinese, Persian, and Arabic. So this was the context that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born into, and the peoples were obviously polytheist, but with some recognition that they had an origin with Abraham. And there were many Jewish tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. And so the Arabs certainly got an understanding of themselves as being descendants of Ishmael, and of course Jews being the descendants of Isaac from Abraham. But the Arabs of Arabia were not highly cultured or highly learned in most, like we'd see in the Roman civilization or in the Persian civilization. And so they didn't understand Christian theology to any depth. They certainly didn't have any libraries. They were mostly an oral culture. So they were, as I said, poetry, which would be memorized, would be the means by which information is stored. And into this milieu, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who was from a noble family, and was esteemed to be someone who was trustworthy and even a mediator between warring tribes or between people who have conflict. One day he came with an amazing claim, which is that he was visited by the angel Gabriel, which we know from the New Testament is a messenger angel. An angel Gabriel came with a message to tell the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to read. And the particular message was, read in the name of your Lord who created man from an alaq, which I suppose would be translated as a blastocyte, something which will form a child in a woman who's pregnant. Read, for your Lord is the most bountiful, who teaches by the pen, teaches man that which he knew not. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, not coming from a Christian background, certainly not coming from a Jewish background, didn't have a frame of reference to understand even what an angel is exactly, and what even revelation looks like. I mean, many Christians would understand what revelation is from reading the New Testament. But in this area of the world that was never conquered by the Christian Romans, nor was conquered by the polytheist Zoroastrian Persians, what frame of reference did the Prophet Muhammad had? He didn't really have much frame of reference to understand what had just happened to him. It was very fascinating. The one area of the world that wasn't actually conquered by the known civilizations, the known developed civilizations, suddenly there was this individual who arose who claimed revelation. But more fascinating was this revelation, which is the Quran. He didn't claim that he wrote it or could write it, or that he could compose it, which is fascinating. And the Quran even speaks to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The Quran has a discourse with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ like it's another person speaking. Or the Quran tells the Prophet Muhammad to say certain things, to tell his people certain things. And many of our verses start with qul, which means say or speak, telling the Prophet Muhammad to speak and relay a message to his people. And even more so than that, the Quran even challenged the people of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that if they doubted that this Quran came from the Prophet Muhammad himself or from some other Arabic author, that why don't they replicate the like of the Quran? And the most minimal challenge is only one chapter. The Quran says, if you doubt that this has come from Allah, then why don't you create a chapter like it? And when the smallest chapter in the Quran is basically 10 words, which is quite fascinating. I mean, like, what do you mean by replicate? What do you mean by imitate? How is this challenge to be met? Without going into too much detail about the phenomenon of the Quran, all language is based on rules. You might even say mathematical rules. In language, there's a spectrum of particular forms of language. On one side, you have the language that gives the most efficient meaning, and it's called prose. All your textbooks are in prose, because the whole point of a textbook is to teach and impart meaning. And on the other side of that is rhythmic speech, which might be song lyric, or poetry, which has metered rhymes. Or it could be rhymes, or just meter without rhymes, where it has the accents on it, which produce rhythm. And why is that? Because humans respond to rhythm. We respond to rhythm and psychologically. And so there's kind of our speech which has rhythmic. But there's a little problem with this, is that the more rhythmic you make your speech, the less efficient the meaning you can impart in that speech. And the more efficient you make your speech, the less rhyme you can make that speech. For example, take a maths textbook or a physics textbook. I mean, can you imagine that being wrapped? I don't think it's possible. And if you do have a rap with that, you would lose some of the precision in the meaning that a textbook has. And that's just the nature of rhythm. But of course, if you also look at rap or song lyric or poetry, what you'll also notice is that to maintain the rhythm and sometimes to maintain the rhyme, you have to invent new words or words that don't have any meaning. So in song lyric, There's all kinds of new words which, in rap, there's new words which are being invented every time. I'm not even going to go into which particular word, there's so many. But you've probably heard these words like shizzle or whatever that means. And a whole number of other words which are invented. Or in song lyric where people just go, doesn't really add any particular meaning to it, right? But they have to add it in to maintain the rhythm, of the speech. And the fascinating thing about the Quran is, and it's something that you really have to behold, is it has maximum efficiency in imparting meaning, like a prose. Anyone of you who doesn't speak Arabic, just read the translation of the Quran. It reads like prose. Many verses are even talking about the division of inheritance. It's very legal in some parts. And you know how prose-like or prosaic, legal texts are. But if you listen to the Quran, it's consistently rhythmic throughout the entire text. And the Quran makes this wonderful challenge to the Arabs at the time, saying, if the Quran is in Arabic pure and clear, so there's no new words which were borrowed or invented, it's clear. It's not like in some songs or song lyrics or rap where you don't understand what's actually being said and you need to have some kind of explanation because the text doesn't actually make sense and so on and so forth. So you need to have the artist explain what he actually was trying to say in that particular matter. The Quran says it is mubin, it is clear. If you read the translation, it doesn't sound like psychobabble, or how you find some spiritualist discourses which don't make much sense, but they sound nice and artistic, but doesn't make much sense. It's very clear. It reads just like prose if you were to look at the translation. But at the same time, the entire text of the Quran is rhythmic. In many cases it rhymes. Sometimes it rhymes using the same end rhymes for up to over 200 verses continuously, which is quite a feat if you could, to be achieved. Other aspects of the Quran baffled the Arabs. The one verse in the Quran can have 6 different meanings, each saying something different, all true, all accurate, and consistent with each other. For example, in English language, how can you do, even my challenge in the English language is, how can you even achieve that in the English language? And this is, I suppose, something we should expect, because you see, if anyone comes with a claim that they received a message from God, that's a very big claim. How do we know that that person's speaking the truth? If I told you that for the rest of this semester, all your exams were cancelled and you just automatically passed, and I spoke to the dean, yeah, people were loving that idea, and I spoke to the director or dean of this university, and they told me personally, you'd say, but that's a pretty big claim, Abdullah. Do you have a signed document or something that can authenticate that? Because I need to know that for certain before I can start partying, right? So if you make a big claim, you have to back it up with something that is authenticated from the source. And the amazing thing in the Quran, and also the word it uses in the Arabic language, which is mu'jiza, meaning, which sometimes is translated as a miracle. The word mu'jiza really translates as something that cannot be imitated, but certainly cannot be imitated by man. And so the Quran basically came to a civilization that prided itself in poetry, in expressive wordplay, and challenged them that if they doubted this was from God, let them replicate something like one chapter of the Quran, and the smallest chapter in the Quran, which is Surah Al-Kawthar, I believe, has only 10 words in it. That's a very big challenge. If it's not true, that's an amazingly bold challenge. And the pagan Arabs were so blown away by this challenge that they accused the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ of being a magician with words. That it was, his words were somehow magic, and it would entrance and enchant your mind to think that this Quran is a miracle, but really it's just a kind of magic. That was the best argument that some of them could do against the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to refute the claims of the Quran, because the Quran didn't just come and say there's only one God. The Quran condemned a lot of the culture of the pagan Arabs. It condemned them for burying their firstborn children alive if they happened to be women. And there was some wonderful polemics in the Quran correcting the people of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from their wayward practices. For example, they would allege that God has 3 daughters. Right? So God has Al-Uzza, Manat, and Alat. Right? So they said these were the 3 daughters of God. And the Quran just has this really incisive polemic which says, is it for God the daughters and for you the sons? That you kill your firstborn if they're female, but yet God can have 3 daughters. Amazing polemics in the Quran refuting the corruption in the pagan society. It refuted how they treat the poor, how they don't give to orphans, how they practice religiosity in public just to be seen, but really they were hypocritical. It was so many invectives against the culture, against their power structure, against the injustice, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ faced a lot of resistance from his own people in his own town, the tribe of the Quraysh, and the people of the town of Mecca.